welcome to one of my first Sunday vlogs. I hope to post this before the end of the day or early on Monday morning. Let's see how much time I have to edit it. I'm trying to diversify my content and not just be doing wrap-ups, because I also enjoy watching people's vlogs. And I think for me, now that my life has become a bit more settled, this year I can start doing some vlogs. So I'm going to start slowly. So this is my first official, I've tried it before, Sunday vlog. And it's sort of a reading vlog. I'll try and see how much content I managed to record during the day as I was reading from early today morning and then later before I go to bed, because there's still a few hours left. So the book that I'm trying to finish reading, that I've been reading for I think the last, I would say 7 or maybe 10 days, on and off, is this. It's called When We Ruled, The Rise and Fall of 12 African Queens and Warriors by Paola Akpan. So a backstory to this book, I remember I had a meeting at one of our local libraries here. And as I was leaving, I think when we were sitting there, we were sitting just next to the entrance, I spied this book and I was like, that looks interesting, because I know the cover. This is Nandi. Nandi was she was a leader, a queen leader in, she was Shaka Zulu's mother, yes. And I think I remember there's a podcast that I listened to that was about her, and I think I've also read, I think there's a podcast that I listened to that I remember, that was about her. I will try and put the title here and in the description box. And that's what really made the cover made it stand out for me. So after the meeting ended, I went and I picked it up. Then I went and renewed my library card because my library card had expired. So I renewed it and picked this among other books. And of course, I knew I wouldn't be able to finish all the books, reading all the books, because I was supposed to return them on the 10th of January, which was yesterday, I think. But then I decided, okay, at least I want to read at least 2 of them. And I managed to finish one before the new year. That was a buddy read, which really helped. It was the Bohemian Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray. And that was a historical fiction, an amazing book about Jessie Redmond Fawcett, who was nicknamed the literary midwife of the Harlem Renaissance. I enjoyed that book, absolutely enjoyed it. And then I was like, the second one that I had already started that I would like to finish is this. And this book, it's nonfiction, obviously. And the author, what I loved about it is she separated, of course, the 12 queens or leaders in the book, and she had like pictures of the ones that were available, not pictures but like drawings. I will put a few here, which were really amazing. So I think it was good when you have a face to a story. So it's a total, she talks about the 12 leaders, and it gives, like she says, there's a lot of history that we don't know, that was hidden from us, or history that was written by the colonialist from a colonialist point of view. So now this is more like us reclaiming our truth, but also the truth isn't exactly what we always want it to be. We try, in as much as there's a way in which we want our history to be told. So we expect these leaders, and especially the leaders who are not men, we expect them to be some sort of way, or there's a way in which the countries or the the tribes or the communities that they led also have like stories about them. And it's not always positive or what we want these stories to be. So going into researching, I love that she actually went and visited most of these countries: Benin, South Africa, Ghana, Mauritius. She traveled to go and search for the history. She talked to she interviewed so many people, and she got so much information. And some of the information that she got actually painted it, they didn't really paint, they showed the truth about what these leaders were doing. Some really, really terrible things that some of them did to stay in power or to justify their fights against imperialism, against Christianity. And still, these are stories that we need to hear or need to be told. So it's a very, very impressive book. I love that in the conclusion she says she expects criticism and commentary on this book, just like the books that she has mentioned. She has also criticized and commented on other books. So it's like this is not the final draft, like this is it, this is all the history you need. No, she hopes that the readers will engage with what she has written, and that is what I have been doing. And when we talk about history, especially African history, there is a question that almost never comes up that honestly should, you know? It's something that I never even asked myself when we were in history classes. Where are the women? I think even growing up in Kenya, the only African leader, or let me say Kenyan leader, that we heard about was Mekatilili. I think she used to belong to the Giriama community, and she fought against the colonialists, the British, when they came to colonize Kenya. But throughout the other history lessons, of course, I didn't really go further with my history classes. I stopped at, I think, 10th grade. But I do not think there were a lot of there was a lot of information about women leaders. Where are the women? Where are the women leaders? African history was usually framed around empires, wars, kings, and conquest. We heard about great rulers, powerful leaders, and major political shifts, but almost all these stories centered men, and not just African men, but often African history as filtered through European voices. African women rulers, military rulers, political strategists, spiritual authorities. I mean, you had to go to look for such information. They were either briefly mentioned, pushed to the sidelines, or completely left out. And for a long time, that absence was treated as normal, like maybe African women just didn't lead. But that idea didn't come from African societies. It came from the people who are writing the history. A huge amount of what we know about pre-colonial Africa was written down after colonization by European scholars who used, of course, there were other scholars before, but the ones who wrote the books that we read were European scholars, missionaries, and colonial administrators, and they were not neutral observers. To say the least. They brought very specific ideas with them about what leadership was supposed to look like. To them, power was male and leadership was passed down, and history was to be written and not spoken. And anything that didn't fit these rules was seen as primitive or unreliable. So when they encountered African societies where women ruled kingdoms and led armies and inherited power through their mothers or shared authority with men, it didn't make sense to them. Instead of questioning their own assumptions, they questioned the African societies where they found themselves in. Or worse, they just erased them. In many cases, the erasure was quiet. There was no dramatic lies, no obvious rewriting, just absence. Entire women rulers missing from the record. Their names never written down. Their reigns summarized in a sentence, if that. Their power reframed as symbolic or even exaggerated. And because African history relied so heavily on oral traditions, storytelling, memory, lineage, community knowledge, these colonial scholars dismissed it as a myth or a legend. If it wasn't written in a European archive, it did not count. So generations of African women leaders simply disappeared from books. And when women couldn't be ignored, when their influence was too big to erase, the portrayal was changed. And instead of being erased, they were made frightening. African women rulers were often described as violent or cruel or emotionally unstable or unnatural, almost monstrous. You see this clearly with figures like Queen Zinga, whose resistance to Portuguese colonization was framed as savagery rather than strategy. What colonial historians didn't want to say was this: she was smart, she was adaptable, she was politically brilliant and incredibly effective. But a woman, an African woman, successfully resisting European power, that was seen as threatening. That was a big threat that they could not just allow to continue or to be read about. So her leadership was changed and it became defined as brutal. And these women's military skills became cruelty, or their refusal to submit became madness. And this pattern shows up again and again in most of these stories, in most of these in this history that we have to go out and find ourselves. Another really subtle thing that colonial history does is label these women as exceptions. You'll see phrases like rare female ruler or despite being a woman, as if these women were random anomalies in otherwise male-dominated societies. But they weren't. Many African societies had long-standing systems where women held real authority. Queens, queen mothers, female chiefs, spiritual leaders, and military commanders. Power didn't always just sit in one person's hands, and it didn't always pass from father to son. We saw kingdoms or communities where actually the crown or leadership was passed from, it was matriarchal, like the sister to a leader took over, and then the son, the nephew took over. That's how it worked in like the Asante community in the present Ghana. Some practiced shared governance. Some recognized women's political power as normal, not unusual. But because that kind of leadership didn't look European, they did not understand it. And these colonial scholars didn't recognize it as legitimate power. If they don't recognize it, then it does not exist. So women were reduced to side roles. They were named the king's wife, the ruler's mother, background figures who supposedly influenced politics from behind the scenes rather than leading openly. These are women who had their own courts, they held their own sessions, they advised the kings, they formed part of these forums where decisions were made. And the impact of all this goes way beyond history books. And this is why so many people grow up believing African women never held power, why women's leadership is treated like modern or Western idea. You know, they say, why you're not traditional? Why are you acting like a modern woman? Why African feminism is often framed as something imported instead of something that is rooted in history. Colonial history didn't just erase our past, it shaped how people see the present. But here's the thing, these stories were never gone. They lived in oral histories, in family lineages, in community memory, in cultural practices. And now scholars and authors and historians are finally going back, listening differently, reading archives critically, and asking better questions, and writing such books. They're not asking, why did African women rule? No, they're asking, why were their stories written out? So maybe the real issue isn't that African women leaders were rare. I think it's that history wasn't written for them to be remembered. And once you start looking at history through that lens, you realize just how much we were never told and how much such books are so important and how much we have to go searching. And I think that this is the part that really messes with people. The fact that you actually have to go looking for these stories. Because if something was truly rare or unimportant, you wouldn't need to dig this hard to find it. It will just not exist. But that's not what is happening here. The information is clearly there. It's just not openly available in the spaces we are taught to trust. We have to really rethink these spaces that we exist in and how much trust we put into the information that we are given. Most mainstream history books, school curriculums, or even popular documentaries are still built on colonial archives. And those archives were never meant to preserve African women's power. They were meant to justify colonization. I think we see that even when we visit museums that are existing in countries in the West, especially when you go to see displays of African culture or African artifacts. First of all, even those artifacts should not be here. They belong to Africans. They belong to Africans. That's where they need to be. So you realize what gets saved, translated, published, and taught is very selective. Colonial records focused on what served the empires, the wars, the treaties, the resources, male rulers who could be negotiated with or overthrown. Women's leadership didn't fit neatly into that system, so it wasn't prioritized, and sometimes it was actively minimized. And then there's the issue of access. A lot of African history lives in oral traditions, local archives, languages that weren't translated, or community knowledge that was never written down in a way colonial scholars respected. And over time, that knowledge gets labeled as folklore instead of history. So when people say, well, if African women ruled, why isn't it in books? That question assumes that books were written to tell the truth, but they weren't. You have to look for these stories because the system that decided what counted as real history were never neutral. They were political, they were colonial, and they were very intentional about what and who they centered. And honestly, that's why learning this stuff can feel like uncovering something that is hidden. Because in a way, it was hidden. It was not lost, it's not forgotten, it is just buried. And once you realize that, you start questioning everything you were taught, every single thing. Not just about African women, but about history as a whole. Where is the truth? So I think that makes me, or makes us, or readers in general, and especially readers who read African stories or stories by indigenous people. That is what we are doing. We are seeking the truth. We are seeking history, the truth that was buried. And I love seeing young scholars going back to these communities and trying to find out what was buried, what was hidden. And I will always be on the receiving side, and I will share whatever resources I get. Like, for example, this book, I will talk about it in the hopes that you are also inspired to find more truth that is out there, and to put it down, write it down somewhere so the next generation can also find it. And that's how we pass down all this information. Thank you so much for joining me on this rambling vlog. But this is just how I try to. I hope not to spoil the book, even though you cannot spoil a historical book. But this is my way of just passing my information, or recommending this book, this really awesome book that, I think everyone should read. Such an awesome book, such an awesome book. And I hope to finish it in the next session if I'll ever reborrow it. But of course, at this moment, I think I will not be able to finish it. It's late. It's almost midnight. And tomorrow I have to be at work. And I have to return this book to the library and pay a fine. And maybe I will go back and borrow it to finish it. Yeah, thank you so much for watching this random vlog, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who you think would be interested. Subscribe if you are not subscribed already, and leave a comment below what your thoughts are when it comes to history about African, or just about women rulers around the world. It's crazy. Everything I've read in this book, it's just totally crazy, like mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. That's one word I would use to describe this book. Okay, bye.